Ethan had always been the kind of person who preferred peace and quiet over drama. He worked from home as a freelance technician, so most of his days were spent fixing software issues, answering emails, and enjoying the calm of his small suburban neighborhood. After years of thinking about it, he finally decided to install a solar panel system on his rooftop. It wasn't just about saving money. He liked the idea of producing clean energy and being less dependent on the electric company. When the installation crew finished their work, the silver panels gleamed in the sunlight, and Ethan felt proud, almost as if he had built them himself. The first few weeks went smoothly. Ethan monitored the energy chart on the small screen installed next to his garage door. He loved seeing how much power the panels captured each day. He enjoyed telling his friends over video calls about how his electricity bill had dropped. Everything seemed perfect except for one thing he hadn't prepared for: the HOA. His neighborhood had a homeowners association known for enforcing lots of rules, sometimes too many. Most people followed the rules quietly, but there was one resident who took those rules far more seriously than anyone else. Karen. Karen was the type of neighbor who noticed everything. If someone's trash bin stayed on the road for 5 minutes too long, she sent an email. If a lawn looked a little too dry, she reminded them about the community standards. She walked around the neighborhood every morning like a security guard, carrying a clipboard and wearing a look that told everyone she was ready to correct them. Some people avoided her. Some politely greeted her. Ethan mostly stayed out of her way. When Ethan first installed his solar panels, he half expected Karen to show up at his door with a list of questions or complaints, but surprisingly, she didn't say anything. In fact, she barely even looked at him when they passed each other on the sidewalk. He thought maybe, for once, she approved of something. But that peace did not last long. About a month after the installation, Ethan began noticing something strange. One afternoon, he checked his solar system's monitoring app and saw that his energy usage looked unusually high. He frowned because he had barely used any appliances that day. It happened again the next day, and the day after that. At first, he assumed something might be wrong with the app. Maybe it was a glitch or a reporting error. Technology sometimes behaves strangely. He knew that better than anyone, but the numbers kept rising in a way that didn't make sense. The energy was leaving the system, but Ethan wasn't the one using it. He walked around the house checking everything: lights, outlets, appliances, the charging cables he usually forgot to unplug. None of it explained the strange pattern. His fridge wasn't broken. His AC wasn't running all day. His computer hadn't overheated. Still, the meter told him someone was pulling extra power. He spent a whole weekend trying to figure it out. He ran tests, shut off circuits, checked wires, and even called the solar company. They said the problem wasn't with the panels. Something or someone was using his power without permission. The realization made Ethan sit still for a long moment. Who would even want to do that? And how? His mind wandered to the only person who always seemed too involved in everyone's business, Karen. But even then, the idea felt unreal. Why would she steal power? Why would she even need to? And how would she have gotten access to his system? Ethan pushed the thought aside. Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe he had misread the charts. Maybe he hoped this was just a technical hiccup. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something outside his home was affecting the system. So he started inspecting the exterior of his house. He checked the utility box, the main breaker, the cable lines leading from his solar converter. Everything looked normal at first glance, but then he noticed something odd. A thin cable running down the side of his house that didn't look like part of the original setup. It blended in well, almost too well, as if someone had placed it carefully to hide it. Ethan followed the cable with his eyes, and his heart began to pound as he realized where it led. It ran through a small gap in the fence and disappeared toward Karen's yard. He didn't touch the cable, not yet. Instead, he stood there staring at it, trying to imagine the situation in a way that made logical sense. Was it possible someone had connected something to his system without asking? And of all people, could Karen really be responsible? She was strict about rules. She loved control. But stealing electricity from a neighbor felt like a whole new level. He wanted to believe there was another explanation, but the cable was there. The energy drain was real. And Karen's house was the only thing on the other side of the fence. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep properly. He kept replaying the clues in his mind. He wasn't angry, yet mostly confused and surprised. He kept picturing the moment he would ask her about it. Would she deny it, laugh it off, pretend not to know what he was talking about? He wondered if he should call a technician or the HOA board, but then he remembered. Karen was on the HOA board. If she really was stealing power, the board might not help him at all. Over the next few days, Ethan walked around with a constant feeling of tension. He checked his solar logs 3, sometimes 4 times a day. The numbers kept proving the same thing: someone was definitely draining his power, and that cable wasn't moving. Every time he peeked through the fence gap, he saw the same thin line disappearing into Karen's property like a secret. Ethan wasn't the type to accuse someone without proof, so he kept gathering information, watching the patterns, comparing the readings. He told himself he would handle it calmly, logically, and without causing drama. But deep down he knew one thing for sure. His peaceful days were about to change. The solar system he had been so proud of had accidentally connected him to the one person in the neighborhood he always wanted to avoid, and whether he liked it or not. The truth about that cable and about Karen was waiting for him to uncover it. Ethan spent the next few days in a constant state of alert. Every time he checked his solar monitoring app, the numbers confirmed what he feared: someone was drawing power from his system. It wasn't a small amount either. It was enough to make a noticeable difference in his monthly savings and even begin stressing his solar battery. He knew he had to do something, but he wanted to be smart about it. Confronting Karen directly without proof felt risky. She was well known in the neighborhood for her ability to twist situations in her favor, and she had a way of making herself look like the victim no matter the situation. Ethan didn't want to end up in an argument where he had no leverage. He decided to take a careful, methodical approach. He began documenting everything. Each day, he recorded the energy usage from his solar system at the same time, noting when spikes occurred. He also inspected the cable more closely. It was thin, almost like an extension cord, but it was heavy-duty enough to carry a significant amount of power. Ethan could tell it had been installed with some care. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. That thought made him both nervous and a little impressed because of the technical skill. Nervous because it was his hard-earned solar energy being stolen. Ethan also began to observe Karen's behavior. At first, he tried to convince himself it was a coincidence, but soon patterns emerged. Whenever he was away or focused on something else, the usage spiked. When he was home and watching the system, it slowed. It was as if the person siphoning energy knew when to avoid detection. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Ethan felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. He had never thought his peaceful neighborhood life could include something like this. A neighbor literally stealing electricity from him. Feeling frustrated, Ethan decided he needed advice. He reached out to a friend who specialized in electrical systems. Over video chat, he explained what was happening, even showing the cable leading to Karen's yard. His friend was shocked. "That's not just careless wiring," his friend said. "Someone went through the trouble to connect themselves to your system. That's theft. You need to document everything and be careful." Ethan took that advice seriously. He set up a small camera to monitor the cable from his side of the fence, hoping to catch who was tampering with it in real time. Meanwhile, Ethan attempted a calm, diplomatic approach with Karen. One afternoon, he walked over to her property, trying to act casual, and brought up his solar system. "Hey Karen," he said, "I noticed some unusual readings on my solar monitor. Have you noticed anything weird in the neighborhood?" Karen, as usual, smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Ethan," she said, "I'm sure it's just a technical glitch. These things happen." She waved her hand dismissively and turned back to her gardening. Ethan left, realizing he had not gotten anywhere. She had denied it without really listening, and her tone made it clear that any further questions might lead to confrontation. This denial only made Ethan more determined. He couldn't ignore the problem. Over the next few days, he became almost obsessed with tracking the energy spikes. He would sit in his living room watching the solar app on his laptop, marking the exact times the spikes occurred, comparing them to when Karen was outside, when she was away, and when she had visitors. Each data point pointed in one direction. Ethan began to see a pattern. Karen had someone or something constantly accessing his solar power. It wasn't occasional. It was continuous. The situation escalated when Ethan noticed damage to his solar battery. The repeated drain had caused minor overheating issues, something his monitoring system flagged as a warning. He had to act fast before the battery was permanently damaged. The idea that Karen's actions could ruin an expensive, environmentally friendly system he had worked hard for was infuriating. He felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and helplessness. This wasn't just about a few extra dollars on his electric bill anymore. It was about principle, about someone taking advantage of him and bending the rules of the community to their favor. Ethan also realized that dealing with the HOA might not help. Karen was influential, and she had friends on the board who trusted her word. If he went to the HOA, she could twist the story, making him seem unreasonable or paranoid. He had to have undeniable proof before he involved anyone else. This meant catching her in the act or proving the energy drain beyond question to gather more evidence. Ethan started using some of his technical skills to his advantage. He rigged a few smart sensors near the utility box and along the path of the cable. These sensors would alert him any time there was energy being drawn or any movement near the cable. He also installed a small time-lapse camera focused on the connection, recording continuously. Every night, he reviewed the footage and the energy logs. The more he watched, the clearer it became. The system was being tapped intentionally, and someone likely Karen was benefiting. Ethan also became more cautious in his daily life. He noticed that Karen would frequently pass by or linger near the fence at odd times. It was subtle, almost casual, but he caught the pattern. Sometimes, she would be gardening directly near the cable. Other times, she would be talking to someone near the property line. Ethan started timing his own activities to coincide with her routines, secretly monitoring when the energy spikes occurred. Each spike matched her presence, which made him more certain of what was happening. Emotionally, Ethan was conflicted. He didn't like confrontation, but the repeated theft of his power made him feel violated. This was his property, his effort, his money, and his time being stolen, and no one else seemed to notice or care. At the same time, he didn't want to create a neighborhood war. Ethan valued peace, and the thought of escalating things with Karen was stressful. But he realized he couldn't wait for the perfect moment. The longer he delayed, the more damage was being done to his solar system, and the more control Karen had. As the week went on, Ethan started to plan his next move. He considered talking to her again, but this time, he would have proof. He thought about going to the HOA, showing the logs and the camera footage. But he also wondered if a more direct approach could work, something that would make it impossible for her to deny or deflect blame. He spent hours thinking about all the possibilities, weighing the risks, and imagining different outcomes. The problem was becoming more serious, more personal, and more urgent with each passing day. By the end of the week, Ethan had a clear understanding of the situation. Karen was taking his power deliberately, his solar battery was at risk, and the HOA would likely protect her unless he had undeniable evidence. He also knew that confronting her without evidence would backfire. He needed a solution that would protect his system, expose the theft, and prevent future problems. The challenge was no longer just about stolen electricity. It had become a battle for control, for fairness, and for his peace of mind. Ethan spent that night staring at the ceiling, planning his next steps. He realized that he had two options: ignore it and continue losing power, or take calculated action to stop it. Ignoring it was unacceptable. This was his home, his investment, and his energy independence. Taking action was risky, but it was necessary. As he drifted off to sleep, he felt a strange mix of fear and determination. He knew the coming days would be difficult, but he was ready to face the challenge head-on. The rising tension in his quiet suburban life was just beginning, and Ethan was determined not to be defeated by Karen's relentless interference. Ethan's quiet life had already been disrupted by the ongoing theft of his solar energy, but the situation escalated in a way he had never imagined. The more he monitored the system, the more brazen the energy theft seemed to become. What had started as occasional spikes in his energy logs now appeared to be a daily routine. Every day, the same pattern emerged. The solar power he worked so hard to produce was being drained, and the culprit's timing seemed almost calculated. Ethan knew he had to act, but this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The first sign of real escalation came one morning when Ethan received an alert from his solar monitoring app. It was unusual, an error message warning that the battery had overheated due to excessive draw. Panic set in. This was no longer just a small theft. It was damaging equipment that had cost him thousands of dollars. He rushed outside to inspect the solar panels and the utility box. Everything looked normal at first glance, but when he traced the cable leading toward Karen's yard, a wave of frustration and anger washed over him. He realized that if this continued, the battery would fail completely, and replacing it would be both expensive and inconvenient. Ethan knew he couldn't handle this with simple observation anymore. He needed direct evidence and a way to stop the theft in its tracks. Over the next few days, he intensified his surveillance. He set up additional cameras, installed motion sensors near the fence, and connected monitoring devices directly to the cable to measure real-time usage. Every detail mattered. Ethan was determined to catch the intruder in the act. He also began studying the times of the day when the spikes occurred, trying to find patterns that could reveal whether it was Karen herself or someone she had enlisted to draw the power. The data pointed toward deliberate, repeated action. Tension in the neighborhood began to weigh on him. Ethan noticed that Karen had become even more active outdoors. She would spend hours near the fence, often appearing to check something on her side, sometimes talking to other neighbors as if nothing was happening. It was clear to Ethan that she either had no fear of being caught or believed she was untouchable because of her position in the HOA. The audacity of it made him more determined. He understood that exposing her would require a clever plan, one that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Ethan began imagining different ways to confront the situation without creating a neighborhood feud. He knew that simply accusing Karen would lead to denial and perhaps even retaliation. He thought about gathering proof in a way that would be undeniable. If he could show the HOA clear evidence of the theft, then Karen's usual tactics, deflecting blame, twisting the story, would no longer work. He realized he needed to escalate the confrontation carefully, combining his technical knowledge with strategy. As he analyzed his options, a plan started to form. Ethan could create a deterrent that would make the theft impossible to continue without exposing itself. He began designing a harmless yet noticeable shocking alert system, something that would trigger whenever power was drawn from the unauthorized line. He wanted the system to make enough noise to catch attention without causing actual harm, ensuring that Karen couldn't deny the incident. It was the perfect combination of technical skill and strategic thinking. Before implementing the plan, Ethan continued gathering evidence. For several days he collected logs from the solar system, monitored video footage, and reviewed motion sensor data. Every spike in power usage matched movement near the fence. It became increasingly clear that the theft was deliberate. The more he observed, the more audacious the thief seemed. One evening, he saw a figure approaching the cable in the fading light. bending down near the connection, and then retreating quietly. Though the camera didn't show a clear face, the posture and familiar movements matched Karen's usual behavior. Ethan felt a mix of satisfaction and nervousness. He now had the evidence he needed to implement his next step. The day came when Ethan decided to put his plan into action. Early in the morning, he carefully set up the alert system along the cable. It was wired to a loud alarm and a flashing light, designed to activate the moment energy was drawn from the line. He double-checked the connections and tested the system several times. Everything worked perfectly. If someone tried to steal power, the alarm would go off immediately, exposing the action to anyone nearby. Ethan felt a surge of excitement and anxiety. This was the critical moment he had been preparing for. Later that afternoon, Ethan observed from inside his house, monitoring the solar app and watching the cameras. Hours passed, and he began to wonder if the thief had noticed the increased surveillance. Then, just as the sun began to dip in the sky, the cable was activated. The alarm exploded into the quiet neighborhood, a combination of flashing lights and loud noise that startled everyone nearby. Birds scattered, sprinklers turned off, and the neighbors peered over fences to see what was happening. And there she was, Karen, caught in the act, clearly surprised and flustered. She froze, looking around at the sudden chaos, as the alarm continued to blare. Ethan watched the scene unfold from his window, feeling a mix of triumph and relief. The carefully planned escalation had worked perfectly. Karen had been exposed, and there was no way for her to deny her actions this time. The neighbors, curious and concerned, started approaching, asking what had happened. Ethan calmly explained that it was a safety alert for unauthorized use of his solar power. The combination of loud alarms, flashing lights, and neighborhood attention made it impossible for Karen to brush it off. Karen, now visibly embarrassed, tried to explain herself, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her usual confidence was gone. The logs on Ethan's monitoring system, the video footage, and the motion sensor alerts all clearly showed repeated energy theft. She had no way to manipulate the story this time. For the first time, Karen faced the consequences of her actions without the ability to twist reality in her favor. Ethan felt a mix of satisfaction and vindication, knowing that he had acted smartly and strategically rather than impulsively. The critical moment didn't end there. Ethan's neighbors, who had been wary of Karen's controlling behavior for years, finally witnessed her in a position of vulnerability. Some were sympathetic to her embarrassment, but most understood the violation she had committed. It shifted the neighborhood dynamic instantly. For Ethan, it was a relief to know that the escalating challenge had reached a turning point. He had confronted the theft in a way that was safe, clever, and public enough to prevent future incidents. After the alarm subsided and the initial shock wore off, Ethan began securing the cable permanently. He documented the incident thoroughly, preparing all the logs, video footage, and alarm records for the HOA. He knew that while the critical moment had exposed the theft, there might still be procedural steps to ensure accountability. He also started thinking about reinforcing his system to prevent any similar attempts in the future. His energy independence was too valuable to leave vulnerable again. Emotionally, the escalation had taken a toll. Ethan had been tense, frustrated, and anxious for days, constantly analyzing data and anticipating the next move. But witnessing the exposure of the theft brought a sense of relief and empowerment. He realized that facing the challenge head, with careful planning and technical skill, had not only protected his property but also restored his sense of control in a situation that had felt overwhelming by the end of the week. The critical moment had fundamentally changed the landscape of Ethan's neighborhood life. Karen, once a seemingly untouchable figure in the HOA, had been publicly confronted with undeniable proof of wrongdoing. The incident made it clear that Ethan's actions had consequences and that clever, strategic thinking could overcome even the most audacious challenges. For Ethan, the experience had reinforced an important lesson. Preparation, patience, and careful planning could turn an escalating crisis into a decisive victory. The days that followed were quieter. The alarm had served its purpose, and no further energy theft occurred. Ethan continued monitoring his solar system, but now with a sense of confidence rather than constant tension. The critical escalation had reached its peak, and the decisive exposure of the theft marked a turning point. He understood that the challenge had tested not only his technical abilities but also his patience, strategy, and courage. What had begun as a frustrating, confusing situation had now become a story of empowerment and resilience, a testament to the idea that careful action could triumph over bold wrongdoing. After the shocking alarm incident, Ethan knew the situation had finally reached a turning point. The dramatic exposure of the theft had left Karen flustered and the neighbors whispering with curiosity. But for Ethan, the challenge wasn't over. Now came the most important phase, making sure that the issue was fully resolved, that his solar system was protected, and that Karen could not continue to steal his power or manipulate the situation again. The first thing Ethan did was collect all the evidence he had gathered over the past few weeks. He had energy logs showing the abnormal usage, time-stamped video footage from the cameras, motion sensor alerts, and records from the alarm system that had gone off when the power was siphoned. Each piece told a clear story. He organized everything carefully, creating a timeline of events that started from the first unusual spike in his solar system up to the day of the alarm. He wanted to be absolutely sure that there was no room for argument or doubt. Ethan then scheduled a meeting with the HOA board. He was nervous. Karen was not only a board member but a particularly vocal and influential one. Ethan worried she might try to twist the story or paint him as the problem, just as she had attempted before. But he reminded himself that this time the evidence was undeniable. The alarm had triggered in front of multiple neighbors, and the footage captured direct interference with his solar system. There was no way to deny the facts. When the board meeting began, Ethan presented the evidence calmly, without any anger or exaggeration. He started by explaining the installation of the solar system and how it had been functioning normally. Then, he walked the board through the unusual spikes in energy usage, showing the charts and explaining what each spike represented. Next, he presented the video footage, carefully pointing out the moments when Karen or someone near her property interacted with the cable. Finally, he played the alarm footage, showing how the system had gone off precisely when the unauthorized power draw occurred. Karen, who was sitting in the meeting, tried to defend herself. She laughed nervously at first, claiming that there must have been a misunderstanding or technical error. But as Ethan calmly laid out each piece of evidence, her excuses began to crumble. The board members, some of whom had been wary of Karen's behavior in the past, leaned forward, clearly paying attention. There was no denying the facts. The proof was thorough, methodical, and undeniable. The turning point in the meeting came when a few neighbors who had witnessed the alarm incident spoke up. That confirmed what Ethan had said, explaining how the loud alarm had startled them and how they had seen Karen near the fence around that time. Their testimony reinforced Ethan's evidence and made it impossible for Karen to continue denying the theft. She grew visibly uncomfortable, her confident demeanor slipping as the room acknowledged the reality of the situation. The board deliberated for a few minutes in private, and when they returned, the decision was clear. Karen would be held accountable. She was fined for the theft of electricity, required to pay for the repairs and replacement of Ethan's solar battery, and temporarily suspended from her position on the HOA board. The ruling was fair, but it also sent a message. The rules applied to everyone, and no one was above them. Ethan felt a sense of relief and vindication. He had prepared carefully, and the truth had won. With the HOA's support, Ethan then focused on securing his solar system. He called in a professional technician to inspect the panels, the battery, and the connections. They reinforced the utility box, installed tamper-proof covers, and added additional security measures to prevent any future unauthorized access. Ethan also updated his monitoring system, setting it to alert him immediately if any unusual activity occurred again. While the incident had been stressful, it also made him realize the importance of proactive security. After the immediate problem was resolved, Ethan took a moment to reflect on the experience. He had faced a serious challenge that combined technical issues, personal conflict, and neighborhood politics. It had required careful planning, technical knowledge, and emotional restraint. But in the end, his perseverance and thoughtful approach had paid off. He had turned a frustrating and potentially damaging situation into a clear victory. Ethan also noticed a change in Karen's behavior following the resolution. She was quieter and less confrontational around the neighborhood. The public exposure of her actions had affected her reputation, and she seemed more cautious in her interactions. While Ethan didn't take pleasure in her embarrassment, he recognized that accountability had a powerful effect. People in the neighborhood had seen that actions had consequences, and that sometimes even the most confident or controlling individuals could be challenged effectively. For the rest of the neighborhood. The resolution also brought a sense of relief. Other residents who had been frustrated with Karen's controlling tendencies began to feel more at ease. They saw that fairness and transparency could prevail, and that someone could stand up for themselves without creating chaos. Ethan's careful handling of the situation had set an example of how to confront problems, respectfully but firmly. Ethan also reflected on his own growth through this experience. He had learned to balance patience with assertiveness, planning with action. He realized that fear or hesitation could allow problems to escalate, but a well-thought-out strategy could turn even a difficult situation into an opportunity for empowerment. The incident had tested not only his technical skills but also his ability to remain calm under pressure and navigate complex interpersonal dynamics. While the conflict with Karen had been stressful, it also reinforced Ethan's pride in his solar system. He now had a reinforced, secure setup that he could trust, and he had learned to pay closer attention to the operation and protection of his property. The solar panels were no longer just a way to save money. They had become a symbol of his diligence, perseverance, and problem-solving abilities. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's life gradually returned to normal. The daily tension and anxiety were gone, replaced by a sense of security and control. He continued to monitor his system, but now with confidence rather than fear. The HOA had handled the situation fairly, and Karen, having faced the consequences of her actions, had become less confrontational. Ethan could enjoy his home, his energy independence, and his neighborhood without constant worry. The resolution of this situation left Ethan with a clear understanding of what it took to protect his home and stand up for himself. He knew that challenges would arise in life, sometimes in unexpected ways, and that preparation, evidence, and careful action were the keys to overcoming them. While the theft of his solar energy had been stressful, it had ultimately strengthened his ability to handle difficult situations and reinforced the importance of fairness, accountability, and self-advocacy through it all. Ethan realized that confronting a problem directly didn't have to mean creating drama or hostility. By relying on facts, documenting evidence, and acting strategically, he had successfully resolved a potentially volatile situation. The resolution marked not just the end of a conflict with Karen, but the beginning of a stronger, more secure, and more confident chapter in his life. Ethan felt a sense of pride in the way he had handled everything. The stolen energy, the manipulation, and the tension with Karen had all tested him, but he had met the challenge with intelligence and patience. In the end, the situation was resolved in a way that maintained his dignity, protected his property, and restored order to his neighborhood. It was a hard-fought victory, one that reminded him that persistence, careful planning, and thoughtful action could turn even the most stressful challenges into meaningful triumphs. After the conflict with Karen was fully resolved, Ethan began to feel a sense of calm that he hadn't experienced in weeks. The constant tension, the worry over stolen power, and the anxiety about the HOA's response were finally behind him. His solar system was secure, the battery had been repaired, and the theft had stopped completely. For the first time in a long while, Ethan could relax and enjoy his home without constantly monitoring his energy logs or worrying about what Karen might be doing next. In the days that followed, Ethan reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about the first moment he noticed unusual spikes in his solar system, the long hours he spent tracking data, and the frustration of being dismissed when he tried to confront the problem calmly. At the time, it had seemed overwhelming, almost impossible to deal with. But looking back, he realized how much he had learned about problem-solving, patience, and strategy. The entire experience had taught him that staying calm, gathering evidence, and acting methodically were the best ways to handle conflicts, even when emotions ran high. Ethan also noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood. The residents who had watched the alarm incident and witnessed Karen's exposure were now more attentive to fairness and accountability. Karen herself had become noticeably less controlling and less aggressive in her interactions. While she still participated in HOA activities, she seemed to have learned that her actions could have consequences and that not everyone would allow themselves to be manipulated. The balance of power in the neighborhood had shifted, and Ethan felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that he had played a role in creating that change. With the immediate problem resolved, Ethan turned his focus to maintaining his solar system and ensuring that it remained fully protected. He installed additional tamper-proof measures, upgraded his monitoring system, and set alerts that would notify him immediately if any unusual activity occurred. These steps gave him peace of mind. The experience had reminded him of the importance of vigilance and preparation. He now understood that investing in security, whether for his home, his technology, or his personal boundaries, was an essential part of protecting what he had worked hard to achieve. The incident also made Ethan more aware of the importance of communication and documentation. He realized that confronting problems without evidence could be risky, especially when dealing with individuals like Karen who were skilled at denial and deflection. By documenting every detail, keeping clear records, and presenting facts logically, Ethan had been able to resolve a potentially explosive situation calmly and effectively. This realization gave him confidence in handling future challenges, both technical and interpersonal, in a measured and strategic way. Emotionally, Ethan felt a mixture of relief and empowerment. The weeks of stress and worry had tested his patience and resolve, but coming through the experience had strengthened his sense of self. He understood that standing up for oneself didn't require aggression or confrontation. It required clarity, preparation, and persistence. This was a lesson he knew would stay with him for the rest of his life. Ethan also reflected on the value of his solar system beyond just saving money. The panels had become more than a practical tool. They symbolized his independence, resourcefulness, and determination. Protecting them had become a matter of principle, a way to assert his right to his own property and his effort. The experience had deepened his appreciation for the work he had done to install and maintain the system, and he felt proud knowing that he had defended it successfully. In the weeks and months after the resolution, Ethan noticed that his daily life returned to a more relaxed rhythm. He no longer felt the need to obsessively check his energy logs, and he could enjoy his home without the background tension of potential theft. Karen's presence, while still part of the neighborhood, no longer carried the same weight of threat. Ethan found that he could now interact with her neutrally, without fear or anxiety, because the situation had been resolved publicly and fairly. The resolution also had a positive impact on the broader neighborhood dynamic. Residents who had felt frustrated or powerless in the past began to feel more confident that issues could be addressed fairly. Ethan's careful, strategic handling of the situation had demonstrated that standing up for oneself could be done, without escalating conflict unnecessarily. The neighborhood, once tense with unspoken disputes and underlying resentment, began to feel calmer and more balanced. People respected the process and saw that rules applied to everyone, creating a sense of fairness that had been missing before. Ethan took time to reflect on his own growth during this experience. He realized that the incident had tested not only his technical skills but also his ability to navigate complex social situations. He had learned to remain patient under pressure, to analyze data carefully, and to approach confrontation in a strategic way. The experience had strengthened his confidence, teaching him that even seemingly overwhelming challenges could be overcome with preparation, thoughtfulness, and persistence. At the same time, Ethan understood that the situation had highlighted the importance of boundaries and self. Karen's repeated interference had been frustrating because she ignored basic respect for personal property. By standing up for himself, Ethan reinforced the idea that his efforts, resources, and space were valuable and deserved protection. This lesson extended beyond the solar system. He realized that protecting one's boundaries, whether physical, emotional, or professional, was essential for maintaining peace of mind and a sense of control. Ethan also found himself sharing his experience informally with neighbors and friends. While he never gossiped or exaggerated, he used the story as a way to illustrate the importance of preparation, evidence, and calm problems. People were curious, and many were inspired by the way he had handled the situation. It became an example of how to confront challenges thoughtfully, without letting frustration or fear dictate one's actions. Ethan felt gratified that his careful approach could serve as a model for others, showing that fairness and perseverance could prevail even in difficult circumstances. Looking back, Ethan understood that the conflict with Karen, while stressful and disruptive, had ultimately been a valuable learning experience. He had faced a challenge that combined technical issues, personal conflict, and community dynamics, and he had come through it stronger, wiser, and more confident. The situation had forced him to think creatively, act strategically, and remain patient under pressure, all skills that would serve him well in the future. In addition to the practical lessons, Ethan also felt a renewed sense of personal empowerment. The experience had shown him that he could stand up for himself effectively, even when facing someone who was controlling, manipulative, or influential. He realized that courage wasn't always about confrontation or aggression. Sometimes it was about careful planning, gathering evidence, and taking action at the right moment. That insight gave him confidence not only in dealing with neighborhood conflicts but also in facing challenges in other areas of life. Over time, Ethan's relationship with his home and neighborhood stabilized. He could enjoy the benefits of his solar system without fear, take pride in the security measures he had implemented, and appreciate the peace that came from knowing his property was protected. Karen, meanwhile, adjusted her behavior and became less confrontational, and the neighborhood overall benefited from the increased sense of accountability and fairness. Ethan recognized that his careful, thoughtful approach had created lasting positive change. Ultimately, Ethan reflected on the experience as a story of perseverance, strategy, and personal growth. He had faced a difficult challenge, stayed calm under pressure, and used his skills and intelligence to turn a potentially harmful situation into a victory. The experience reinforced his belief in the importance of preparation, evidence, and thoughtful action, and it strengthened his confidence in his ability to handle whatever challenges might come his way in the future. Ethan's solar system, once just a practical tool for saving electricity, who had become a symbol of resilience, independence, and resourcefulness. Protecting it had required careful thought, patience, and courage. In the end, the situation with Karen had not only been resolved but had also left him stronger, wiser, and more confident in his ability to face challenges. He knew that the lessons he had learned would stay with him forever, shaping how he approached problems, relationships, and personal boundaries in all areas of his life. Through the aftermath and reflection, Ethan realized that sometimes challenges appear in unexpected forms, testing patience, skills, and resolve. But with careful planning, strategic action, and a calm mindset, even the most frustrating and complex situations could be resolved successfully. The experience had been intense, stressful, and at times overwhelming, but it had ultimately been empowering. Ethan emerged from the ordeal with a deeper understanding of fairness, accountability, and the importance of standing up for oneself, fully prepared to enjoy his home, his solar system, and his neighborhood in peace and confidence.